Listen, Oliver, Tom continued, lowering his voice. That horse has seen things, endured things beyond imagination. It's not just pain he carries, it's betrayal, confusion, maybe even shame. If you want to help him, you have to understand what broke him first. You can't ask for trust if you're not willing to dig into the hurt. Oliver swallowed. The thought of confronting the darkness in Sovereign's past, of asking questions nobody wanted answered, filled him with dread. But it also sparked a flame of determination. He looked up at Tom, meeting those wise blue eyes. I will, Oliver said. I'll uncover his past. I'll do whatever it takes. Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded. That's good. Because truth is, sometimes healing means bringing shadows into the light. It won't be easy. But you're not alone in this. They stood together for a while, neither speaking, watching as Sovereign dozed in the early sun, twitching in uneasy sleep. Birds chirped from the hedgerows, and the village church bell tolled the hour, marking the slow, relentless passage of time. Before leaving, Tom shared one last bit of wisdom, his voice soft. You know, lad, horses are like mirrors. They reflect back what they see in us. If you give him patience and honesty, he'll give you his truth. Might not be pretty, but it'll be real. Oliver thanked Tom, feeling both lighter and heavier at once, a strange sense of being entrusted with something sacred and dangerous. He watched the old man disappear into the mist, shepherd's staff swinging, leaving behind an air of ancient knowledge. For the rest of the morning, Oliver walked the paddocks, lost in thought. He remembered snippets of gossip from Tattersall's, whispered names, sidelong glances. Lord Pemberton, Lady Victoria, the hint of violence in their laughter. He resolved to find out everything he could, no matter how unpleasant. Back at the stable, he sat cross-legged in the straw, notebook in hand, jotting down questions. What happened before the auction? Who heard him? What did the aristocracy want to hide? He scoured the internet for clues, piecing together fragments of old racing programs, grainy photographs, faded headlines. He found a name. Yorkshire Estate, Lord Pemberton's ancestral home. Stories of trainers dismissed in disgrace, horses vanishing after injuries, rumors of bloodstains in the hay and broken whips left behind. The more Oliver dug, the more dread crept into his heart, but he pressed on, driven by Tom's warning and his own stubborn hope. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded and Sovereign nibbled at hay for the first time since arriving, Oliver felt a shift, a subtle change in the air, as if the farm itself was holding its breath. He knelt beside the stall, speaking softly to the horse. I don't know everything yet, he admitted, but I promise I'm going to find out. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Sovereign watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, but did not retreat. Instead, he let Oliver's words fill the silence, a fragile thread tying them together. That night, Oliver dreamt of storms, wild wind tearing across the hills, voices calling out in the dark, horses running in terror. When he awoke, the dawn was breaking gold over the Cotswold fields. He looked out at Sovereign, standing in the paddock, and felt the weight of the mission ahead. The truth would test everything he believed about trust. But Oliver was ready. He would face the darkness of Sovereign's past, not just for the horse, but for himself. He understood, at last, that sometimes the only way to heal was to walk straight into the shadows, lantern in hand. And so the next chapter of their journey began, with wisdom gained, a promise made, in a bond that, though fragile, might one day become unbreakable. The next morning dawned with a relentless determination in the air, a cold, clear light flooding the Cotswolds, slicing away the last traces of mist and doubt. Oliver stood at his kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the broad back of Sovereign grazing quietly in the paddock. Every muscle in his body was taut, his mind turning over Tom's words. You can't mend what's broken if you don't know where the cracks are. The phrase echoed louder than the birds outside. He knew what he had to do. The answer was clear and chilling. He needed to go back to where Sovereign's wounds had begun. He needed to find the truth at its source, even if it meant stepping into the lion's den. Tattersall's was bustling that day, a parade of polished boots and tailored suits, the scent of wealth and ambition in the air. As Oliver strode past the glossy-eyed buyers and gossiping trainers, he felt invisible and exposed all at once, a nobody in a place that worshipped power and status. He made his way to the main office, a cramped space behind the grandeur, and waited his turn while an officious clerk shuffled papers and frowned at a ledger. When his turn came, Oliver tried to sound casual, but his voice trembled. "Excuse me, I purchased a horse last week, lot 147. I'm looking for information about his previous owner." The clerk didn't even bother hiding her skepticism. "You're the one who bought that wreck?" she said, her pen hovering midair. "You've got more heart than sense, son." "I just want to know where he came from." She gave him a long, searching look, then sighed, flipping through her files. "Lord Pemberton? Yorkshire Estate? That's all we have here. Not exactly a place for friendly visits." Her tone suggested Oliver would regret what he found. Outside, Oliver felt a chill gnawing at his resolve. Yorkshire was half a day's drive north, a world away from the gentle green hills of the Cotswolds. The further he drove, the more the landscape changed. Rolling pastures giving way to harsher, stonier fields, the color leaching from the countryside until only muted browns and grays remained. The villages along the way looked shuttered, wary, as if the shadows of the estate reached even here. When he reached the Pemberton estate, he stopped at the entrance and stared. What had once been a grand symbol of aristocratic pride was now a ruin of faded splendor. The iron gates, once polished and ornate, were flaked with rust, hanging off their hinges like broken limbs. Beyond, the driveway was choked with weeds. Collapsed fences dotted the property, and the mansion itself loomed in the distance, windows black and lifeless as empty eye sockets. Oliver drove slowly, every sense on alert. He parked by the stables and stepped into a world frozen by neglect and pain. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old hay, and every footstep seemed to echo with memories best left undisturbed. He pushed open the stable door. The darkness inside was nearly absolute, save for thin beams of light slicing through broken boards. The scene before him stopped his heart cold. Dried bloodstains mottled the rough wood of the walls. Leather whips, some broken, lay scattered in corners. A bucket, kicked and bent, rested in a pile of moldy straw. Deep grooves scarred the stall doors, marks left by hooves in terror and rage. Oliver's chest tightened. It was as if the suffering had soaked into the very bones of the place. He moved from stall to stall, gathering fragments of Sovereign's story. A length of racing bridle with initials burned into the leather, an old feed bucket with Sovereign's original name scratched out, replaced by a number. In the dust, he found a faded photograph of a younger, healthier horse, proud and fierce, with a garland around his neck. The caption was nearly illegible, but the name Royal Thunder shimmered through the grime. He heard a sudden movement, a whisper of footsteps in the shadows. Oliver spun around, heart thumping, but it was only a stray cat darting across the floor. He let out a shaky breath. This place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of cruelty and regret. Out in the yard, a local villager paused by the gate, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked under a scarf. She eyed Oliver with suspicion. "You're not from here." "No, ma'am. I'm looking for answers about a horse. Used to race here." She hesitated, then looked past him at the ruined stables. Terrible things happened there. We all knew. No one spoke. Lord Pemberton, he broke more than just horses. There were nights you could hear them scream, not just the animals either. Oliver swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do you know what happened to Sovereign?" She shuddered. "Not by name, but there was a beautiful stallion, proud, wild. They tried to break him, but he fought. They starved him, beat him, worked him until he fell. Then they hid him away. Some say he was dead. Others prayed he escaped. Thank you, Oliver said, his words small against the enormity of what he'd just heard. As he walked back to the car, a grim determination filled him. He took pictures. Evidence, he told himself. Someone had to remember. Someone had to care enough to expose the truth. But fear wormed its way into his stomach as he realized what came next. Lord Pemberton, the architect of all this pain. If Oliver wanted to heal Sovereign, he'd have to face the man who'd nearly destroyed him. He paused at the car, staring at his reflection in the window. His eyes looked older, harder. This was no longer just about a horse. It was about justice. It was about facing down monsters, no matter how well they hid behind titles and walls. Before he drove away, he glanced back at the estate, the mansion still brooding over the broken land. A storm was brewing on the horizon, wind rustling through dead leaves. Oliver knew that the next time he crossed that threshold, it wouldn't be as an investigator. It would be as an accuser. The drive home was silent, the countryside slipping past in blurs of gray and brown. Oliver's mind replayed the images. The bloodstains, the terrified whinnies, the villagers' haunted eyes. He knew what he had to do. He'd return to face Lord Pemberton, no matter the cost. That night, he sat beside Sovereign's stall, his hands shaking as he stroked the horse's neck. "I'm about to learn the truth, boy," he whispered. "But will I be strong enough to bear it?" Sovereign turned and looked at him, eyes full of ancient sorrow, and for the first time, something like hope flickered between them. The hunt for truth was far from over, but Oliver was no longer afraid of the darkness. He had seen the cracks. Now he was ready to mend them, one painful truth at a time. The road back to the Pemberton estate seemed even longer the next morning. Clouds pressed low, thick and bruised, as if the very sky knew Oliver was on his way to confront something rotten at its core. He barely slept, tossing and turning, imagining what he'd say to the man who had left such scars, not just on Sovereign, but on the land itself. Each mile north, the green faded to brown, and the silence grew heavier, settling around Oliver like a shroud. He turned into the estate's drive and parked by the manor house this time, his heart hammering. The place felt colder, emptier, even more derelict than before. The mansion, with its covered windows and faded grandeur, seemed to leer at him from behind layers of grime. A tangle of dead ivy clawed up the walls. The wind rattled loose shutters like angry spirits. Oliver stood at the heavy front door, took a deep breath, and knocked. The echo seemed to ring forever. When at last the door creaked open, the butler eyed him up and down, taking in the muddy boots, the worry lines, the stubborn set of his jaw, then led him inside with barely a word. Inside, the manor was a mausoleum. Furniture draped in white sheets lined the long hallway, dust motes swirling in the shafts of weak sunlight. Staring portraits followed Oliver with cold, judgmental eyes. It felt as if he was walking through the memory of a dynasty, rather than its living heart. At the end of the hall, Lord Pemberton awaited him, slouched in a faded armchair, brandy in hand. He looked older than at the auction, his hair thinning, his eyes bloodshot, but glinting with the same cold arrogance. An ancient dog lay at his feet, gray around the muzzle, as silent and bitter as its master. "You bought that worthless animal? How quaint," Pemberton said, voice dripping disdain. "What brings you back here, Mr. Hartwell? Did he die already? Or are you here for a refund?" Oliver forced himself to stay calm, though anger threatened to boil over. "I came for answers. About Sovereign. About what you did to him." Lord Pemberton snorted, swirling his glass. "That's not his name. Never was. We called him Royal Thunder, back when he had some spirit, before he turned out to be a disappointment." Oliver's jaw clenched. "He didn't disappoint anyone. You broke him." Pemberton stood, walking to the window, looking out over his dying lands. "You don't understand the business, boy. Racing is war. There are winners, and there are culls. The weak get weeded out. I invested thousands in that stallion. his bloodlines, his training, the best facilities money could buy. But he wasn't strong enough, couldn't handle the pressure, always fighting, never yielding, useless. Fighting? Oliver stepped closer, feeling the storm inside him rise. He fought because you hurt him, because you starved him, beat him, forced him to run while he was injured. Pemberton whirled on him, eyes flashing. I did what was necessary. You can't build a champion without breaking their spirit first. Sometimes pain is the only teacher. Oliver's voice cracked with disgust. You didn't break his spirit. You shattered his soul. A bitter silence filled the room. Outside, a branch scraped against the window like the scratch of a whip. The old dog lifted its head and whined, sensing the tension. Lord Pemberton shrugged, setting down his brandy with a clink. Perhaps someone else would have seen something I didn't. Maybe there was greatness there. Once. But in this world, weakness cannot be tolerated. Not in horses, not in men. If you're not strong, you're nothing. For a flicker of a second, Oliver saw something strange in Pemberton's face. A crack in the mask. Regret? Memory? Or just the passing shadow of a younger, better man? It was gone in an instant, replaced by cold indifference. He turned away, gazing at a faded photo on the mantel. A much younger Pemberton, holding a champion's trophy, surrounded by men in tuxedos, smiles bright and hopeful. He was magnificent once, Pemberton murmured, so softly Oliver almost missed it. But that didn't matter in the end. The business eats the weak alive. Oliver's rage burned in his veins, but he forced himself to steady his breathing, to speak the words he needed to say. He's not weak. He's a survivor. And you're the one who failed. You're the one who gave up when he needed you most. Pemberton gave a hollow laugh, waving a trembling hand. Take your bleeding heart somewhere else. I have no time for the pity of country boys. I'm not here for pity, Oliver replied, his voice steady now. I'm here to promise you something. I'm going to replace every painful memory you left him with love and patience. I'll show him that not every hand is cruel. I'll show him he's worth saving. The old man looked at him, a long, strange look, half contempt, half something like shame. Do what you want. But the world won't change just because you wish it so. Oliver stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Maybe not. But for one horse, for Sovereign, it will. He turned and walked out, his boots thudding on the marble floor. As he left, he thought he heard the old man mutter, barely audible, maybe someone ought to save the rest of us too. The weight of the confrontation pressed on Oliver's shoulders as he stepped back out into the cold wind. He leaned against his car, letting the anger and heartbreak wash over him. He could still hear the words, "You can't build a champion without breaking their spirit," and felt sick to his stomach. But as he looked back at the crumbling estate, he made a silent vow. Sovereign's story would not end in that darkness. He would bring the horse back into the light, no matter what it took. The world might be cruel, but that didn't mean he had to be. As Oliver drove away, he felt a sense of purpose sharper than ever. It wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about proving that love could outlast cruelty, that trust could be rebuilt, one gentle touch at a time. That night, back at the Cotswolds, Oliver stood in the stable, brushing Sovereign's tangled mane, his voice low and calm. "You're safe now," he said, over and over. "I promise. I'll replace every painful memory with something better. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Sovereign shivered, but didn't flinch. And as Oliver watched the horse begin to relax, if only by an inch, he realized the real work was just beginning. But how can one person erase such deep wounds? The question haunted him as he drifted to sleep. But for the first time, he let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible, even for the most broken souls. Midnight in the Cotswolds brought with it a darkness deeper than any Oliver had known. The sky was pitch black, moon veiled behind thick clouds, wind whispering secrets through the ancient oaks surrounding the farm. The world seemed suspended, as if holding its breath. Inside the cottage, Oliver sat by the window with a single lamp burning, staring into the shadows outside. He could barely concentrate on his book. His thoughts kept circling back to Lord Pemberton, the battered stables, the hollow cruelty that still echoed in his bones. Sovereign slept restlessly in the barn, hooves occasionally stamping the straw, haunted by dreams only he could see. A sudden knock broke the silence. Not a timid tap, but a firm, insistent rap that seemed to slice the night in two. Oliver's heart thudded. Visitors were rare after sunset, and no one ever came at this hour. He rose slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath his bare feet, and took up a heavy flashlight. He hesitated at the door, listening. The wind gusted, then all was still. He opened the door. There, beneath the stoop light, stood a stranger. A tall man wrapped in a black cloak, a silver-tipped cane in one hand, his face half-shadowed beneath the brim of a wide hat. The stranger's eyes glinted, catching the lamplight, but it was the expression on his face that stopped Oliver short. Not malice, but something closer to remorse. Or was it shame? "Mr. Hartwell?" the man said quietly, voice gravelly with age and regret. "Yes. Who are you?" Oliver kept his grip tight on the flashlight, tension knotting his shoulders. The man pulled back his hood, revealing a distinguished but weathered face, sharp cheekbones, and a gray-streaked beard. "My name is Sir Reginald Ashworth. I knew you'd come looking for answers about Pemberton and about the horse." The name meant little at first, but the way the man stood, the uneasy guilt in his eyes, set Oliver on edge. "How did you know where to find me?" "I have connections," Sir Reginald replied, his tone evasive. "I came because there are things you need to understand, things I should have spoken of long ago." Suspicion prickled Oliver's skin. "Why now? What do you want from me?" Sir Reginald's gaze dropped to the gravel. "I want to make amends. I worked with Pemberton. I was complicit in his methods, maybe not as cruel, but I never stopped him. I saw what happened to Royal Thunder. He faltered, emotion thick in his throat. "I was not brave enough to stand up to him." Oliver's anger bristled. "You were there, and you did nothing." Ashworth nodded, swallowing hard. "I am not proud of it, but I have carried the guilt for years. When I saw you bought him, that you wanted to heal what we destroyed, I realized I had to help if I could." They stood in tense silence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The weight of Ashworth's confession pressed in, but Oliver couldn't shake his suspicion. "So, what, you want to feel better about yourself? Wipe the slate clean?" "No," Sir Reginald said quietly. "I want to help you restore what we destroyed. If that is possible." A gust of wind whipped through the trees, rattling the old windows. Oliver stared at the man, searching for deception. He saw only weariness and the heavy shadow of regret. "If you're Rush, telling the truth, if you really want to help, Sovereign comes first. No more secrets. No more games." Ashworth nodded. "Agreed." They walked together to the barn, Oliver's footsteps uncertain, Ashworth's measured and careful. In the stable, Sovereign raised his head, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. Ashworth approached slowly, voice soft. "He doesn't remember me. Or if he does, he remembers pain." Oliver stood by Sovereign's side, hand on the horse's shoulder. "He's not Royal Thunder anymore. He's Sovereign." Ashworth's lips quirked in a sad smile. "That's a good name. He was the best of his generation, you know." Before Pemberton broke him. For the first time, Oliver heard the full story, how Sovereign, once known as Royal Thunder, had been a champion in training, destined for greatness. He heard how Ashworth and Pemberton, both driven by ambition, had pushed the horse past his limits, forcing him to race with injuries, demanding more with each victory. When Sovereign finally faltered, unable to hide his pain, Pemberton had unleashed his rage. Ashworth had watched, paralyzed by cowardice, as the abuse escalated. He had not laid a hand on the horse himself, but his silence was just as damning. "He could have been the greatest of his generation," Ashworth said, voice cracking. "I destroyed that. I helped bury his spirit. But you, he trusts you. I've seen it, even in his eyes tonight." Oliver looked at Sovereign, the horse's body tense but his gaze less wild than before. "Trust is fragile," Oliver said, "and so is healing. If you want to help, it's not about me, or you. It's about giving him a future." Ashworth nodded, removing his hat. "I want to earn that chance. I know traditional training methods, gentle groundwork, patience, respect. I can teach you. And I can reach out to others, professionals who specialize in trauma." Oliver considered, heart pounding with possibility and doubt. Could he really trust this man? Or was this another trap? Another aristocrat trying to soothe a guilty conscience? He stared Ashworth in the eyes, seeing not a villain, but a man scarred by his own failures. "All right. We do this my way. Sovereign's needs come first. You teach, you help, but you don't push him. Not ever." Ashworth agreed, a look of humble gratitude softening his features. "I understand." That night, as Ashworth took a cot in the barn and Oliver lay awake, listening to the rhythmic breathing of horse and man, a strange sense of hope flickered in the dark. Perhaps enemies could become allies. Perhaps the past could be redeemed, not by forgetting, but by facing it head on. But still, doubt gnawed at Oliver's mind. Could he really trust Sir Reginald? Would Sovereign accept help from the very world that had broken him? Or was this alliance doomed by secrets and shame? As the barn settled into uneasy sleep, Oliver knew one thing. The road ahead would be hard, but he was no longer walking it alone. And for the first time since the auction, the future seemed less like a broken promise and more like a challenge he might just survive. Does Sir Reginald truly want redemption, or is this another trap? The answer, Oliver realized, would only be found in the days to come. In sweat, patience, and the courage to let hope in. The first light of dawn filtered through the Cotswold trees, painting golden stripes across the paddock and stable yard. For the first time since bringing Sovereign home, Oliver awoke with something more than worry gnawing at his chest. There was a flicker of hope. Sir Reginald Ashworth had stayed true to his word, rising early and helping with the chores. Despite the awkwardness between them, Oliver sensed the man's determination to do right, no matter how late in the day that reckoning had come. But Oliver also knew, just as old Tom had warned, that good intentions alone weren't enough. The scars Sovereign carried weren't just flesh and bone. They ran deeper, buried in the tangled memories of pain and betrayal. To truly help him heal, they needed more than kindness. They needed expertise. That morning, Oliver placed a call to Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a renowned equine psychologist specializing in trauma and rehabilitation. The conversation was short and direct. Dr. Whitfield's voice brisk yet warm, as she promised to drive down that very afternoon. By noon, a sleek SUV pulled up the gravel drive. Dr. Whitfield stepped out, a tall woman in her early 50s, dressed sensibly in riding boots, khaki breeches, and a dark green field jacket. Her eyes were sharp, her movements efficient. She shook Oliver's hand with a firm grip, then turned to Ashworth, studying him with quiet curiosity before heading straight for the stable. She spent the first hour simply observing, leaning against the stall door, watching Sovereign with the measured calm of someone who'd spent her life among wounded creatures. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving in quick, silent bursts. Finally, she spoke. "He's got all the classic symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress," she said. "His body language is hypervigilant. See the way his ears never stop swiveling. His tendency to press himself against the far wall when anyone enters. He's not just afraid of pain. He's expecting it at every moment." Oliver felt his throat tighten. "Is there any way to fix it?" Dr. Whitfield smiled, kind but honest. "Not fix, Mr. Hartwell. Heal. That will require patience, science, and a lot of love. We'll approach this from multiple angles: physical therapy for his body, desensitization for his mind, and most important, trust-building exercises that put him in control. She sketched out a plan, a daily schedule that balanced rest, gentle engagement, and carefully calibrated challenges. Mornings would begin with massage therapy, using long, slow strokes to ease the knots from Sovereign's muscles and help him associate human touch with comfort, not pain. Mid-mornings, Dr. Whitfield introduced music therapy, playing soft classical pieces in the background while she worked. The gentle notes of Debussy and Satie weaving a cocoon of calm through the stable. Sir Reginald watched with a mix of fascination and guilt, never far from Sovereign's stall. Dr. Whitfield included him in the routines, teaching him groundwork techniques that relied not on dominance, but on mutual respect. Gentle circles on a lead rope, soft voice cues, and the subtle dance of trust that horses understood better than most humans. Every touch, every word, was an attempt to rebuild what had been shattered. Progress came slowly, but it came. In the first week, Sovereign allowed Oliver to brush his mane without retreating. By the end of the second week, he began responding to Oliver's voice, turning his head and flicking his ears at the sound, no longer just shrinking from it. Dr. Whitfield kept meticulous records, charting each victory no matter how small. "He's starting to remember what love feels like," she told Oliver one afternoon, her eyes shining with quiet pride. But the journey was not without setbacks. One stormy evening, thunder cracked overhead and the sky poured down sheets of rain. A flash of lightning illuminated the barn just as Oliver entered to check on Sovereign. The horse, startled and trembling, relapsed into panic, rearing and nearly breaking free from his halter. It took Oliver, Ashworth, and Dr. Whitfield nearly an hour to calm him, their voices low and soothing, hands steady but never forceful. Afterward, Oliver sat on the stable floor, soaked to the skin, his hands shaking. "What if he never recovers?" he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Dr. Whitfield put a hand on his shoulder. "Healing isn't linear. Setbacks are part of the process. What matters is that you're here every time he's afraid, proving that trust can survive even the darkest memories." Ashworth, humbled and quieter than ever, began to show his own capacity for gentleness. One afternoon, while working in the paddock, he recounted stories of horses he'd known as a young man, gentle giants who'd carried him across Yorkshire hills, clever mares who could open latches with their lips. There was sorrow in his words, but also a kind of hope, a sense that perhaps, through Sovereign, he might find some redemption for his past. The breakthrough, when it came, was unexpected. It was a sunny morning, birds chirping, the world bathed in gold. Oliver was brushing Sovereign's shoulder, humming absent-mindedly to one of the classical pieces Dr. Whitfield favored when he felt the horse's warm breath on his neck. Suddenly, Sovereign nuzzled into Oliver's shoulder, a gentle, hesitant gesture, but filled with trust. Oliver froze, hardly daring to breathe. Tears welled in his eyes. Dr. Whitfield, witnessing from the stall door, grinned wide. "This is remarkable progress," she said. "You've built a bridge." For the first time, Sovereign allowed Ashworth to touch his muzzle, accepting a piece of apple from his palm. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. The shadows that had haunted Sovereign for so long seemed just a little lighter, his eyes brighter, his head held a touch higher. That night, Oliver wrote in his journal by lamplight, hands shaking with hope. "Today, I felt what forgiveness looks like," he wrote, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet moment. A horse, once broken, choosing to trust again. But even as they celebrated, Dr. Whitfield reminded them, "The real test will be when Sovereign returns to the track. That's where the trauma lives deepest. That's where we'll see how far he's come." As darkness fell, Oliver lay awake, Sovereign's steady breathing a comfort in the night. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine not just recovery, but triumph, the possibility that the broken could be made whole, and that hope, once lost, could be found again. But the real test will be when Sovereign returns to the track. The morning of Sovereign's return to the track arrived shrouded in anxiety and cautious hope. Oliver stood at the edge of the yard, fingers trembling as he secured the trailer. Every movement was deliberate, careful. He could sense the tension radiating from Sovereign, who shifted nervously inside the stall, ears swiveling at every new sound. Sir Reginald and Dr. Whitfield helped load him, working in practiced silence. They all knew what this day meant. Lambourne, the Valley of the Racehorse, wasn't just a place. It was a crucible, a living memory for horses who'd tasted both triumph and terror. It was where legends were made, and where Sovereign's nightmares began. As they drove through the countryside, fields rolling by in a blur of green and gold, Oliver tried to calm his racing thoughts. The world felt alive, spring in full bloom, hedgerows bursting with flowers and birdsong. But the beauty outside only seemed to heighten the anxiety inside the trailer. He caught glimpses of Sovereign through the small window, sweat already glistening on his coat, muscles taut, nostrils flared. When they finally arrived, Lambourne was just as Oliver remembered. Wide, open gallops stretching beneath a vast sky, the air crisp with morning dew and the earthy scent of horses. The track's white rails gleamed in the sunlight, a ribbon of promise and threat. Sovereign stood frozen in the trailer, head high, eyes wide. He seemed to sense the place, his breaths coming shallow and fast. Oliver felt a lump rise in his throat. He glanced at Dr. Whitfield, who nodded encouragement. "We'll take it slow. One step at a time." They lowered the ramp, and Oliver spoke gently. "You're safe, boy. This is different now. I'm right here." It took 10 minutes for Sovereign to take his first step onto the unfamiliar ground. When he did, his whole body trembled. Ashworth waited quietly, holding the lead rope with a loose, steady grip. Dr. Whitfield stood nearby, hands ready to intervene, but face relaxed, radiating calm. A group of trainers and riders paused their workouts to watch, curiosity and skepticism flickering in their eyes. Oliver ignored them, focusing entirely on Sovereign. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just look at me, not them." They began walking slowly toward the track. Each hoofbeat seemed to echo in Oliver's chest. The further they went, the more agitated Sovereign became. Eyes darting, tail clamped, sweat darkening his coat. When he caught sight of the gallops themselves, he stopped dead, muscles rigid as stone. Flashbacks hit him hard. Oliver could see it in the way Sovereign's gaze went distant, how he recoiled as if hearing sounds only he remembered. The crack of the whip, the shouts of trainers, the sting of racing with wounds unhealed. His panic grew, and for a moment Oliver feared he might bolt. "It's all right," Oliver murmured, stepping between Sovereign and the track, placing his hand gently on the horse's trembling neck. "We don't have to do this today." Sir Reginald stepped closer, voice low. "He needs to face this, Oliver. If he doesn't, the fear will win." Oliver looked from Reginald to Dr. Whitfield. She nodded. "He decides the pace. But you stay beside him, no matter what." Oliver took a deep breath and nodded, eyes shining with resolve. He stood close to Sovereign, matching his breathing, letting his presence ground the horse. Slowly, he coaxed him forward, a step at a time, never forcing, always waiting for Sovereign to choose. They reached the edge of the track. Sovereign's legs shook, every instinct telling him to flee. Horses thundered by in the distance, their hooves pounding out memories of pain. He wanted to run, but Oliver's calm voice anchored him. "You're not alone. I'm here." They waited. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. Sovereign inched forward, muscles quivering, but he did not retreat. Sweat ran down his sides, his breathing ragged. Oliver felt every moment like a knife's edge. And then, with an almost imperceptible nod, Sovereign took a step onto the track. It was chaos in his mind. He shied at a shadow, muscles bunched, ready to explode. But Oliver did not let go. He stayed beside him, hand always within reach, voice a steady stream of comfort. Sir Reginald walked on the other side, silent but solid, a living wall against panic. At one point, another horse galloped past, and Sovereign flinched so hard the lead rope snapped tight. Oliver barely kept his balance, but he did not let go. "Easy, boy. Just breathe. Just look at me." They circled at the far edge of the track, away from the busiest lane. Sovereign's panic threatened to boil over again, but Oliver kept talking, each word a lifeline. Finally, Sovereign's breathing slowed. His ears flicked back, then forward, listening. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he was not being forced. He was being invited. Dr. Whitfield approached with a smile. He's not running, but he's not bolting. That's huge. Oliver's voice cracked. It's everything. The next hour was a slow, fragile victory. Step by trembling step, Sovereign made his way around the track. Just walking, never more. At first, he stopped every few paces, looking to Oliver for reassurance. Oliver answered with quiet words, a gentle hand, and unyielding patience. Halfway through the lap, the sky opened up, sunlight flooding the track. A small group of bystanders began to clap, first out of surprise, then out of genuine admiration. Oliver blinked away tears, pride swelling in his chest. When they finally completed the circuit, Sovereign halted, sides heaving, nostrils flaring. He looked at Oliver, then at the track, as if trying to make sense of what he'd just done. Sir Reginald reached out, voice trembling. He remembers who he used to be. I can see it. Oliver wrapped his arms around Sovereign's neck, burying his face in the horse's mane. For the first time in years, Sovereign did not shy away. Instead, he stood tall, his head high, a spark of something ancient and noble shining in his eyes. Dr. Whitfield grinned. This is just the beginning. The real test still awaits. But today is a miracle. As they led Sovereign back to the trailer, trainers and riders came forward, offering praise, some even apologizing for their earlier skepticism. Oliver accepted their words, but his attention was on Sovereign, on the slow, steady rhythm of his walk, the growing ease in his posture. He realized then that the journey was no longer about redemption for the past. It was about the future, about showing the world what courage and trust could build from the wreckage of old pain. As they drove home, the fields rushing by, Oliver felt a deep sense of pride, not just for Sovereign, but for all of them. Against every odd, they had taken the first step together into the Valley of Champions. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had proved that hope could be stronger than fear. And as the sun set behind them, casting the countryside in gold, Oliver looked at Sovereign, still trembling, but no longer broken, and whispered, "You did it, my friend. You did it." But this is just the beginning. The real test awaits. The air at Ascot Racecourse shimmered with anticipation. Even before sunrise, the grounds were buzzing, stable hands moving with brisk purpose, jockeys checking their gear, aristocrats and racing fans filling the grandstands, all eyes hungry for the drama that only this historic track could provide. Here, where kings and queens had watched generations of champions thunder past, every blade of grass seemed to remember the thunder of hooves, the burst of victory and the sting of defeat. Oliver hardly slept the night before. He lay awake in his tiny room above the stables, listening to Sovereign's quiet breathing through the window, his own heart pounding with fear and hope. Dr. Whitfield's last words played over and over in his mind. This is the test. Here's where he'll face every demon. Sir Reginald, sitting silent in the corner, had nodded in grim agreement. For all the training, all the gentle steps and small victories, this, returning to the track where Sovereign's pain began, was the moment of truth. Morning dawned clear and cold. Sovereign stood at the edge of the paddock, eyes wide, sides already damp with nervous sweat. The sounds and scents of Ascot hit him in waves. The crackle of loudspeakers, the faint scent of liniment and roses, the distant rumble of the crowd. He shifted restlessly, sensing the tension in the air and in Oliver's voice. As they led him toward the parade ring, a hush fell over those nearby. Some recognized Sovereign, the miracle horse, the once broken thoroughbred whose story had spread beyond racing circles. Whispers trailed them. "Is that really him? I heard he'd never race again." "That's the boy from the auction, isn't it?" Oliver kept his focus on Sovereign, brushing a trembling hand down the horse's neck. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "I won't force you. Not now. Not ever. But if you want to try, if you want to show them who you are, I'll be with you. Every step." The royal box, flags snapping in the breeze, loomed over the track, a symbol of the ultimate stakes. This was more than a race, it was a reckoning. As the bell for the first trial race rang, Sovereign's muscles tensed. The clang of the starting gate brought a flash of panic to his eyes, a memory of pain, fear, and broken trust. For a split second he froze, rooted to the spot, nostrils flaring, legs trembling. The crowd's murmur grew. "What's wrong with that horse?" a woman called. "He looks terrified." Oliver felt the pressure building, both from the watching eyes and the trauma rising in Sovereign's heart. "We can go home," he whispered. "You don't have to prove anything." But Sovereign didn't move. He stood, breathing hard, lost in a whirl of memories. Pemberton's voice, the snap of the whip, the sting of forced labor. The world spun, closing in until everything narrowed to one single touch. Oliver's hand, steady on his neck. Then, without warning, Oliver stepped onto the track beside him, breaking every rule of distance and decorum. He stood in front of Sovereign, blocking the chaos of the crowd, and spoke softly so only the horse could hear. "You're not alone anymore. I'm here. We're in this together. Always. Can you feel my heartbeat? I'm not afraid. Not with you." He pressed his palm to Sovereign's shoulder, feeling the rapid thud beneath the skin. He closed his eyes, letting his own breathing slow, willing calm into the trembling body beside him. Gradually, Sovereign's shaking subsided. He looked at Oliver, searching his face, and something shifted. The memory of pain receded, replaced by the warmth of trust. A hush fell over the track as Sovereign, guided by Oliver's touch and words, stepped forward, one stride, then another, head held high. Each step was a battle against fear, but also a declaration. "I am more than what you did to me." At the starting gate, the officials hesitated, uncertain how to proceed. Dr. Whitfield approached, explaining quietly, "Give them a moment. He needs this. They both do." The crowd, sensing something extraordinary, fell silent. Oliver slipped the lead rope from Sovereign's bridle, standing to one side, but never letting his gaze waver. "It's up to you now," he murmured. "You decide." The gate opened. Sovereign stood still, the world holding its breath. Then, slowly, with infinite caution, he took a step, then another, hooves ringing on the packed dirt. The other horses surged past, but Oliver and Sovereign walked their own path. Halfway down the straight, Sovereign paused, ears flicking, eyes brightening. He looked at the crowd, at the royal box, and at Oliver. And then, almost as if remembering who he truly was, he broke into a trot, smooth and strong. The audience gasped, then erupted in applause. Oliver ran alongside, breathless, barely believing what he saw. Sovereign picked up speed, muscles bunching, stride lengthening. Each stride shook off a piece of the old pain. He moved with the grace of a king reclaiming his crown, his spirit blazing in the morning sun. As he crossed the finish line, alone, not racing, but conquering, Ascot erupted. The grandstands stood, hats waving, tears shining in the eyes of even the most jaded trainers. The royal box sent down an envoy with a bouquet and a bow. Sir Reginald stood at the rail, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. Dr. Whitfield laughed, shaking her head in wonder. "He did it," she whispered. "He really did." Sovereign, chest heaving, pranced in a circle. Oliver rushed to his side, arms thrown around the horse's neck. For a long, shining moment, the world seemed to pause. A broken king had reclaimed his throne, not by outrunning the past, but by facing it. In the silence that followed, Oliver raised his head and met the gaze of Lord Pemberton, who stood in the stands, pale and speechless. There was no need for words. The victory spoke for itself. The crowd began to chant, a single, rising voice. "Sovereign, sovereign." The chant carried on the wind, echoing down the generations, rewriting the story of the horse once broken, now whole. As the sun climbed high over Ascot, Oliver led Sovereign back to the stables, the adoration of the crowd trailing behind like a cloak of light. He whispered into Sovereign's ear, "You're not just a survivor. You're a champion. And nobody can ever take that from you." In that moment, Oliver knew the journey wasn't only Sovereign's. It belonged to all who had ever been cast aside, all who had been told they were broken. It was proof that with trust, patience, and a second chance, any soul could rise again. The real test had come, and together they had conquered it. News of Sovereign's astonishing return spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. The miracle horse of Ascot, broken no more, the king returns. Journalists camped outside Oliver's humble farm. Reporters called from London, New York, Sydney, wanting interviews, wanting a glimpse of the horse whose spirit had made the world believe again. At first, Oliver was overwhelmed. The phone rang constantly. Mail arrived by the bag. Letters from school children who'd watched the race on television, from old jockeys who wrote, "He made me remember why I loved horses." From people struggling with pain, illness, or heartbreak, who saw their own struggle in Sovereign's story. Some sent poems, some sent prayers. A group of children from a hospital in Manchester sent a poster covered in crayon drawings, Sovereign leaping over a rainbow, Oliver by his side. A news crew arrived to film a special segment. Cameras followed Oliver and Sovereign through the misty fields, capturing moments of quiet connection. Sovereign grazing peacefully, Oliver running his fingers through the stallion's silken mane. When the segment aired, the world saw not just a horse and his owner, but a bond built from patience, pain, and an unshakable belief in second chances. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Teachers wrote to ask if they could share Sovereign's story in their classrooms. Oliver received invitations to speak at assemblies, community centers, even at a youth correctional facility. At first he hesitated, nervous before crowds, but something in Sovereign's journey gave him courage. He accepted. At a local school, standing before rows of wide-eyed children, Oliver told the story, not the fairy tale, but the real, messy truth. He described the scars, the setbacks, the days when hope seemed pointless, and the tiny victories that changed everything. When a young girl asked, "Is it true he used to be broken?" Oliver knelt and smiled. He wasn't broken. He just needed someone to believe in him. We all do, sometimes, even grown-ups. The children clapped and laughed. A boy with a stutter raised his hand, wanting to know if horses could get better from anything. Oliver nodded, his voice strong. Horses can heal. People can too. Sometimes we just need time. And kindness. It wasn't just children who found hope in Sovereign's story. Soon, therapy programs sprang up across the country, using his journey as inspiration. A veterans' rehabilitation center in Scotland named its new equine therapy barn Sovereign's Sanctuary. Counselors found that telling Sovereign's tale helped those struggling with trauma or loss begin to open up about their own pain. Oliver and Sovereign traveled to a handful of these programs, meeting patients and volunteers. At every stop, Sovereign seemed to sense the weight in people's hearts. He would stand quietly, letting them stroke his neck, breathing slow and deep until the tension eased. For some, it was the first moment of calm they'd known in years. The national press clamored for a homecoming. So, months after the victory at Ascot, Oliver brought Sovereign back to Tattersall's, the very auction room where mockery and shame had nearly ended his story. This time, the air was different. The walls, once echoing with laughter and scorn, now hummed with anticipation and respect. When Oliver led Sovereign through the grand doors, the crowd rose to its feet. Silence fell, then applause thundered through the hall. Even the auctioneer, who had sold the broken horse for a pittance, wiped away a tear as Sovereign strode past, head high, coat gleaming, eyes bright. The same men and women who'd once looked down on him now bowed their heads, some embarrassed, some inspired. A reporter leaned in and asked, "What changed?" Oliver looked at Sovereign, then at the crowd. Sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful if you give them a chance. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the Cotswold hills, Oliver and Sovereign stood alone in the golden light. The farm was peaceful again, the world's noise far away. Sovereign grazed, unhurried, his scars now part of his story, not its end. Oliver sat on a fence, legs swinging, and let the silence settle. He thought of the journey, the auction, the old wounds, Tom's wisdom, Reginald's redemption, Dr. Whitfield's tireless care. He thought of every moment he'd nearly given up and the thousand small miracles that kept him moving forward. He realized something profound. I thought I was saving him, but he saved me. In learning to listen to Sovereign's silence, to see past the scars and into the heart of pain, Oliver found himself transformed. He discovered reserves of patience he'd never known, strength that grew not from pride but from humility and love. As the last light faded, Oliver spoke softly, voice trembling but clear. He taught me that healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about choosing love, despite the scars. That night, a gentle breeze stirred the fields. Sovereign galloped across the grass, mane and tail streaming, silhouetted against a sky painted with the colors of dusk. Oliver watched, a bittersweet ache in his chest. Gratitude, loss, hope, all bound together. The letters kept coming, each one a reminder that Sovereign's legacy was bigger than a trophy or a title. It was the knowledge that every soul, no matter how wounded, deserves a second chance. It was the truth that kindness, persistence, and faith could change not just one life, but many. Months later, at a public event, a young woman asked Oliver the question he'd come to expect. Do you really believe everyone deserves a second chance? He smiled, Sovereign's lead rope in hand. Every broken soul deserves a second chance. Sometimes, all we need is someone who believes in us. The applause was warm, but Oliver hardly heard it. His gaze was on Sovereign, who stood proudly beside him. Once lost, now found, the king of his own story. As the final chapter faded into twilight, Oliver offered a challenge to everyone listening. One simple question, lingering in the hush. Do you believe in the power of second chances? And somewhere in the golden fields, as Sovereign ran free, the answer soared with him, bold, unwavering, and eternal.